Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On Attachment. In today's episode, we are talking all about self-sabotage. So what it is, why we do it, and most importantly, how we can shift those patterns so that we can move ourselves more towards the lives, the relationships that we truly desire. So self-sabotage is one of those areas where I think most of us would be able to raise our hands and acknowledge that there have been times in our lives where we've said we want something and we've really meant that. It might be our deepest desire to build a healthy relationship, to only go for people who we know are good for us, or maybe it's something totally separate from relationships. Maybe it's work related or even health or fitness goals. We've all got something like that where we've really wanted something and yet for some reason we've really struggled to take the steps needed to move ourselves closer to that thing that we say we want. And I think that when we go through particularly repeated cycles of setting a goal or setting an intention or just knowing deep down that we really yearn for something, and then not only struggling to take steps towards it, but maybe engaging in behaviors that are directly in opposition to that thing, to then look at ourselves and say, why do I always do this? Why do I always self-sabotage? And oftentimes that can come with a good dose of shame and a sense of brokenness. There must be something wrong with me. Why does this feel so hard? And of course, when we are responding to ourselves with that kind of mindset and attitude of frustration and shaming and blaming, it tends to stop there. We tend not to learn much from that. We tend not to be able to distill any meaningful lesson from that. We just collapse in that shame, and then we'll almost certainly find ourselves in that same pattern and cycle again. And so understanding self-sabotage, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. What is this really about, and why is it such a challenge for so many of us, particularly when it feels obvious the steps we need to take to achieve what we need to achieve, or to let go of certain dysfunctional or destructive behaviors? Why does it feel so very challenging? And understanding what the underlying drivers of those behaviors might be allows us to address the root cause of that self-sabotage rather than just feeling like we are broken and resigning ourselves to a lifetime of unhealthy, dysfunctional, negative cycles in our self-talk, in the choices that we make, in what we accept as our lot in life in terms of what is available to us. So there is huge reward to be gained from understanding and ultimately breaking these cycles of self-sabotage. And I want to really assure you that it is possible to do that. I used to be very, very accomplished at self-sabotage in all sorts of areas. I used to regularly engage in behaviors that felt at odds with what I wanted. And that always led to a loss of self-respect, damage to my self-worth, my self-esteem. It was a really tough cycle to be in because, of course, the more that you do that and then the less self-respect, self-esteem, self-worth, self-trust you have, the more likely you are to do that in turn the next time. So I am sharing what I'm sharing today from a position of very much knowing what it's like if you are in that place of finding yourself stuck in these cycles. And it is a message of hope because it is absolutely possible to make those changes in the direction of the life that you want. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I will be sharing specifically in the context of attachment styles and dynamics, what you might experience or see from different attachment styles in terms of the likely expressions of self-sabotage in a relational context based on attachment style. And that will hopefully steer you in the direction of knowing what you would need to address in order to shift those patterns as well. Before we dive into that, a couple of quick announcements. I am very excited to share that Healing Anxious Attachment is coming back this week in a few days' time. I've actually made a really big decision since the last episode I recorded, so in the past week, and that is that I am going to transition Healing Anxious Attachment to being an evergreen course, which is kind of online course lingo for you can enroll at any time rather than it being a set enrollment with cohorts, typically 3 times a year. So I'm going to have a rolling enrollment for that. as of the end of this week when I open enrollment, which means you can join at any time. You will still have access to a community space for the 8 weeks that you are doing it, and you will then have lifetime access to the course materials once that 8-week period has expired. You'll also get invited to 2 live calls with me during the 8-week period that you're doing the course. So without boring you with all the details, I've tried to find a sweet spot whereby you can sign up anytime but still get the live components of being in a community with others who are also doing the course at the same time as you, and also getting interaction with and feedback from me as you work through the materials through that community and the live Q&A calls that you'll be invited to. So I am trialing this, to be honest, as a way to alleviate a bit of the burden of launching, because launching is a very energy intensive thing to do as a business owner and it comes around really quickly. So I'm trying to free up a bit of bandwidth for myself in not having to go through the launch cycle every few months. But as I said, also trying to make the course more available, because invariably people discover my work or the time feels right and it's out of cycle with when the launch is happening. And so people have to wait a few months and all of those things. So hopefully it's solving all of those problems and will be now available for you to join anytime. There is still an advantage of jumping on the wait list this week though, because that will entitle you to early bird discount. After this last launch, the price will return to its regular price. So you'll still save $100 by being on the wait list, and that is definitely worth doing. So jump on the wait list if you're keen to join, and I look forward to seeing you there. Second quick announcement is my homecoming mastermind. I announced this a couple of weeks ago, but this is the most intimate and advanced way to work with me. It's a 6-month program, like a high-level mentorship. It's the only way you get one-to-one access with me at the moment. So you'll have one-on-one voice message access to me for 6 months, in addition to small group coaching calls, a really beautiful curriculum over the 6 months, so monthly themes around releasing the past, self-worth, embodying ease, getting really clear around what you want to create in your life and relationships. So it's a really beautiful program. And if you have been interested in working directly with me and you're really looking to invest in your growth and development at a more advanced level than just doing a shorter online course, I would love to see you inside Homecoming. And last but not least, sorry, I said this was going to be quick announcements and it's proved to be a little longer than usual. There's just a lot going on at the moment, so thank you for your patience. The third announcement is just a reminder about my retreat in Byron Bay here in Australia, which is happening in May. We are still offering extended payment plans. It's going to be an absolutely incredible 3 days and nights. So if you want to really go deep and take advantage of the magic that happens, not only doing in-person work, but intensive work in a beautiful environment, I would love to have you join us at the retreat. If you don't know of Byron Bay, it's absolutely incredible. It's kind of where all the celebrities hide out in Australia. And the property that we've booked is called Sun Ranch. I'll leave you to Google that or look up their Instagram. Suffice it to say, it is absolutely exquisite, beautiful property, incredible facilities. So if you're interested, I would absolutely love to have you there. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about self-sabotage. So as I said in the introduction, I think most of us construe self-sabotage as us getting in the way of ourselves, right? Where we want something, there's something that is really important to us, that we value, that we desire, that we're yearning for, and we become our own worst enemy in the pursuit and the attainment of that thing. And so we find ourselves really internally conflicted, and there's some part of us that is more powerful than maybe our conscious will or intention that seems to be blocking us from having what we want. And that can feel frustrating and defeating and confusing and demoralizing. And I think without the context for it can lead a lot of people to just feel broken and feel maybe even pathetic. Like, what is wrong with me? Why is this so hard? Why are other people able to go ahead and do those things and achieve and take steps towards and enjoy these aspects of life? And here I am, and I can't even take one step towards it. I can't follow through on the simplest of commitments to myself. Why is that so hard for me? And it really, that kind of, not only the behavior, but all of the self-talk and the judgments that go along with it are incredibly destructive to our sense of self, our self-respect, our self-worth. As I said in the introduction, this is a pattern that I know very well. And so in understanding self-sabotage, I suppose what I really want to emphasize at the outset is that when we are viewing it as that, as there's something wrong with me, and to put it bluntly, I always fuck things up for myself, I'm always getting in my own way, there's not much for us to do with that other than punish ourselves and beat ourselves up. And as I've said a million times before, as I will always say, nothing grows there. Shame is not the fertile soil that we need to nurture our growth and our evolution. So being able to reframe it as something that makes sense rather than something that doesn't make sense or is just wrong or frustrating or broken is absolutely essential. And so here is the reframe on self-sabotage that I really want to emphasize and for you to understand. Self-sabotage happens when a part of us, or maybe many parts of us, multiple parts of us, do not feel safe taking steps towards or having the things that we say we want. Okay, so that might be getting healthy and taking our fitness seriously, or it might be intimacy with someone else. It might be taking a risk in our job. It might be starting a business. All of these things that on paper or in theory, we're like, yes, that, I want that. Maybe even something as simple as resting and having more pleasure and ease in our lives. Maybe you're someone who says you want that, and you look at people who, are relaxed and easygoing, and you go, oh, I want that. And yet the second you have free time, you fill it with busy things and you can't actually sit still, or you end up just doing work the whole time and going back to your emails or whatever, right? So there are so many instances where the thing we say we want doesn't actually feel safe to some other part of us. Some part of our subconscious, our nervous system, our body does not feel safe having the thing that we say we want. And sometimes it'll be we don't feel safe having it, and other times it'll be we don't feel safe taking the steps towards it that we would need to take in order to have it. And once we see it through that lens, we start to be able to understand, okay, there are powerful protective forces at play here. And those parts of me, these protective parts, are really fiercely trying to keep me safe. And so the question then becomes, what is it about having this thing that feels unsafe to my system? And what would those parts need in order to feel safe enough to take those steps or to have that thing? What reassurance, what comfort, what sense of trust would I need to establish within myself and for myself in order for that to feel more comfortable? Okay. You see how when we approach ourselves from this lens of curiosity and the starting assumption that we do make sense rather than that there's something wrong with us and we don't make sense, that the next step reveals itself when we can ask that follow-up question of, okay, what would I need in order to feel safe to have this thing? What need is my so-called sabotaging behavior meeting is another really revealing question. So you might look at something that is less protective, so to speak, and more destructive. So for example, maybe you went out and got blind drunk and were out until 4 a.m. the morning before a really important job interview for a job that you really wanted, and then you bomb out in the interview and then you shame and blame yourself for that. It might be hard for you to look at that and go, oh, there's a part of me that's protecting me from something. But I'm sure if we were to dig into it, maybe some part of you didn't feel worthy of having the job, or thinks that you'll just mess it up anyway. And by doing that, then you have a reason that you didn't get it. Maybe it feels so vulnerable and there's a fear of rejection or a fear of failure. And so going out and doing that thing allows you to be less vulnerable because you've got less at stake. It's almost like, well, I was never going to get it anyway, so who cares? This thing of feigning indifference is another way that we can protect ourselves from the vulnerability or the fear of failure. You see that in relationships all the time. People who pretend not not to care, or really convince themselves that they don't care about relationships, they're not invested, and they don't allow themselves to be, because if they're not invested and they don't really care anyway about the outcome, then they can't get hurt. So there is always, if we just peel back the layers, there's always some kernel of self-protection involved in these behaviors that we deem self-sabotaging or self-destructive. And it's only when we can get to those that we can actually start to solve for whatever the core need is there, whatever the fear is, whatever the vulnerability is, that is so powerfully prompting our system to say that thing does not feel safe. And so we're going to engage in whatever behaviors we need to. We will reach for whatever strategies we need to reach for to prevent that from happening. Now, as I said, I want to frame this a little in terms of each of the attachment styles. I know the examples I've just given are not specific to relationships, and that is intentional because I really want you to understand how far-reaching this is, because the more you can see those tentacles in different areas of your life, the more you can apply this broadly and hopefully allow yourself to bring a little more internal harmony into the system in a way that allows you to take steps towards those things that you really do want. So in terms of relationships, for anxiously attached people, I think self-sabotage would usually take the form of hyperactivating attachment behaviors, meaning when my attachment system is threatened, my sense of safety in relationships is threatened, what do? I ramp up, I dial up, I escalate all of my attempts at getting closeness, reassurance, and the safety that those things bring me. But oftentimes, and particularly when it takes the form of really dysregulated anxious behavior, calling someone 20 times in a row and firing off a bunch of text messages, all of these things can frankly scare someone away because they can be really intense and overbearing, and it can just feel like a torrent of anxious energy being fired at someone in a way that it's almost like you recoil by instinct. You want to step back from that kind of energy. And so oftentimes this self-sabotage of someone who is anxiously attached is in the form of all of those protest behaviors or those activating strategies that are kind of grasping, clutching at someone, trying to get something from them, get closeness, get reassurance, get intimacy, get more, and end up pushing them away, scaring them off. I think that will be a familiar tale to many people, and maybe particularly in the early stages of relationship where we know anxiously attached people can really struggle, is like navigating that dating stage where there is uncertainty and there is kind of a lack of clarity at times. You don't have full access to this person's world. And so you might feel a bit shut out and kept at arm's length while you navigate those early stages before it's, really official and clear. I think anxiously attached people really struggle there, and oftentimes their self-sabotaging behaviors can kind of fire up there and become the self-fulfilling prophecy of pushing someone away. We freak out that someone's pulling away or they're not into us, and we engage in all of those behaviors that are just like a hamster wheel of anxious energy, and lo and behold, that person loses interest or is a bit put off by the intensity, and that proves the story right. There goes the shame response, there goes the this always happens, there must be something wrong with me, and that leads us to be more certain next time that the same thing's going to happen, which then triggers these same behaviors, right? So that's usually the flavor of self-sabotage that you're going to see and experience amongst people with anxious attachment. For more avoidant people, the self-sabotage looks more like, no surprises, the deactivating strategies and the pushing someone away, and even like getting the ick, which is essentially getting turned off inexplicably by someone and hyperfixating on perceived flaws or things that are unattractive about them that then lead you to want to walk away from the relationship. And so if we're talking about in this framework of something about having the thing that you say you want doesn't feel safe, for the avoidant person, they may really want the relationship, but something about that doesn't feel safe. And so their sabotaging parts are going to come out guns blazing with all of the reasons why the relationship's not actually a good idea, their partner, not a good fit, maybe it's not the right time, maybe we should just take things slow, like all of these things, or anything up to just like disappearing, ghosting, going AWOL. All of these are different expressions of that same pattern of something about the thing I say I want doesn't feel safe, and so I am going to create these blocks between me and that thing, or I'm going to veer off course altogether so that I don't have to experience the unsafety, the discomfort, the unfamiliarity of being in that uncharted territory that doesn't feel good to me, that I can't really trust in the safety of. For people with more disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment, I think you could probably say that self-sabotage is maybe, in its traditional sense, most common amongst people with fearful avoidant attachment, because they have the internal conflict of wanting diametrically opposed things. And so because of that, they feel so much internal push-pull, and they are constantly in conflict there, and they will want one thing but then pull themselves in another direction in such an obvious way that I think most people with disorganized attachment would put their hands up and say that they were masterful at self-sabotage and probably shame themselves a lot for it. So I think some common expressions of self-sabotage for fearful avoidance, apart from the obvious being that push-pull and hot-cold, would be a lack of impulse control. So that's noted as being a feature oftentimes of fearful avoidant attachment, that they struggle with impulse control and can be quite impulsive. And obviously being impulsive and lacking impulse control can often take the form of doing things that are not well thought out and that are maybe not in integrity or in alignment with your values or what you truly want. So just doing the thing that feels easy or pleasurable or whatever in the moment that has really negative consequences for your life. So a lack of impulse control. And another key area that comes to mind for fearful avoidant attachment in terms of self-sabotage might be big emotional outbursts, reactivity, big ruptures, and then maybe experiencing shame afterwards. And so not really going to repair that, just writing the relationship off, burning the bridge. And this can be, friendships, colleagues, the whole bit. It's just, well, that's done now and I don't want to go near it. And that can be another form of self-sabotage as well. So the reason that I share all of this, and what I'm really hoping that you're starting to understand and hearing it, is that safety is at the heart of most everything. And to the extent that we are experiencing these internal conflicts between the thing that we want and the thing that we keep doing that is taking us further away from the thing we want, that's a really good clue. That is almost a sure sign that some part of you does not feel safe having the thing that you want. And your job is to figure out what it is there. What need is the sabotaging behavior, the destructive behavior meeting? What is it protecting me from? What am I afraid would happen if I were to step towards the thing I want? What risk is there that I may be protecting myself from? Is it a fear of failure, a fear of rejection, a fear of not being good enough? All of these really common ones that can feel so visceral, right? And these are survival things, like the systems that govern our self-sabotaging behaviors. That's really our nervous system fighting tooth and nail to keep us in familiar territory, keep us in what we know. Because even if what we know is not what we want, there is a certain safety in that. And our system is not really interested in self-actualization. It is interested in survival. And so you will almost always experience a level of friction as you try to make changes, as you try to live a bigger life, a life that is more expansive, more vulnerable, which inevitably means more risky, right? There is not very much risk involved in staying in the cozy confines of our comfort zone. But of course, there's not as much reward there either. So it's really about reframing the way that we relate to that and understanding that that discomfort is not necessarily something we need to pull back from, but rather something that we need to address within ourselves and keep coming back to this question of what do I need in order to create enough safety for myself to be with the discomfort of this transition or this change. And that is really what allows us to unlock the possibility of making these bigger changes in our lives towards what feels really deeply aligned and rewarding and abundant. And as I said, having been through all of this and come out the other side, I can really safely say that it is indeed possible. So I hope that that's been helpful in reframing self-sabotage for you and giving you something to think about. As I said at the start, there are a few different ways that you can work with me coming up if that is something that you identify within yourself and you would like some support in unraveling and overcoming. It can certainly be helpful to have someone to point out your blind spots as you do that work, because of course the old way has been in place for a very long time, and sometimes we need a little bit of hand-holding and a little bit of a nudge as we move towards implementing the new way. So I'm going to leave it there because this is getting long, but as I said, hope it's been helpful for you. As always, so grateful for those of you who leave reviews and feedback. It really does help so much. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks, guys.